This episode of Paradigm Profiles is called Boxer Goes Toe to Toe on Easter Sunday. So look, man, when I talk about jumping in the ring with someone to put on an exhibition event or to fight for the purpose of YouTube entertainment, I'm all for it, but it's all in the name of fun and games. I'll be the first one to tell you guys that I'm too old to be out in the streets gangbanging or fighting like I used to when I was in my prime. At the age of 52, I assume that the days when I used to get into fights, stabbings, or shootings were pretty much long behind me, and that those things would remain in my past. Not only because we all tend to slow down and become more humble as we age, but in my case, I've always tried to avoid getting myself into trouble because of everything I've been through, and more importantly, because of all the trouble I was just recently in. When you're faced with almost 200 years, or you successfully fight back that third strike, which is essentially a life sentence, it slows you down and gives you a dose of reality that makes you appreciate your freedom just a little bit more. I think having walked that line and having been in a situation where your life and your freedom were hanging in the balance is enough to slow anyone down. But then again, because of some of the choices I made in the past and because of what I was once involved in, I can't never allow myself to become too complacent or too laxed out here either. I've always got to remember that I still have a target on my back and that I'm always going to have to continue looking over my shoulder. And this will continue into my 60s, 70s, and however much longer God continues to give me breath. That's just one of the realities that I'm always going to have to deal with. Since I've been out, I've had several incidents because of this very reason. And I've had some close calls, but until now, it's not something that I've talked about either. Some of it was because I didn't want to give too much attention or credit to people who were obviously trying to make a name for themselves. And some of it was because I just didn't want people knowing about the personal shit I was having to deal with out here. I'll get into some of the other incidents I've had in the past, but for now, I want to tell you guys about an incident that just happened this past Easter Sunday. And before I get into this, let me just say a few things. I debated on whether I was even going to drop this for the simple fact that I haven't made it a habit of telling fake war stories just for the purpose of getting views. That's not my thing. Otherwise, this is something I would have been doing in the past. I'm not going back in the past and creating these trumped up stories about how I got ran up on, or how I fought 50 dudes, or how I used a butter knife to stab 5 dudes in the county jail. This is something that just happened the other day. But the reason why I debated on dropping this is because it just seems like it's bad timing. Everybody and their grandmother are telling gunslinger war stories right now, so I didn't want it to appear as if I was trying to ride that same wave. Don't get me wrong, I'm not throwing shade towards those that languish in telling these self-glorified stories. More power to those of you who do it, but speaking for myself, it's just not my thing. For those of you who are my day oneers, you guys know that this isn't my get down and that I've never been a part of the goof troop. But after speaking to several people who ended up being the voices of reason, they encouraged me to go forward with putting it out there anyway. Because the thing about this incident that I got into isn't so much about what happened and the glory of it, but it's the important lesson to learn that I wanted people to walk away with. And that's the reality of what type of ensuing consequences you'll always have to live with when making the type of choices that I did when I removed myself from that lifestyle. You can never allow yourself to become too complacent or laxed in life, even 10, 15, or 20 years later, long after you think the smoke's clear and that you're no longer a factor. I'm no dummy. I always knew that those choices came with real consequences and a real level of threat. But situations like the one I had on Easter Sunday just reaffirms that the threat's real and that it always will be, and that situations can develop when you least expect it. Now, the other thing I want to say is this. I don't go out looking for shit to get into. I don't waste my time trying to press up on or confront every individual who I think might be trying to be tough, or everyone who I think is trying to mad dog. That's what I used to do. But the difference back then was I was a lot younger and I was still active. Regardless to what some people might think, I still need to walk on eggshells out here. The 3 strikes law is still applicable to me, and I don't have no breaks coming if I get caught up hurting someone or getting into a situation that appears as if I'm the instigator or the aggressor. trust me, there's a lot of people who want to see me fail and get tripped up. So even in situations like the one I got into this past Easter Sunday, I still have to be mindful and careful. I could easily end up back in jail or prison if I'm not careful. Anyways, for the most part, Easter, like most other holidays, was and is just another ordinary day for me. My kids are fully grown up and live on their own. So there was no Easter egg hunts, there was no barbecue, and there were no big Easter Day celebrations. It was just another day like any other day. And there was nothing about this day that stood out from any other, with the exception of what I'm about to tell you guys. So for most of Easter Sunday, I spent the better part of my day hunkered down in my little corner, working on YouTube content and typing up my next profile. Sometime at about 7 p.m. though, I did something I don't normally do. I jumped in my truck and decided to grab some quick takeout from one of the local taquerias that's about 5 blocks away from my house. Honestly, I really don't go out and eat that much. But this one taqueria I decided to go to was in an area that's probably considered to be one of the worst parts of the city I live in. Isn't it always like that though? For whatever reason, in order to go get some good ass Mexican food, you gotta go deep into the grimiest parts of the hood. I had been to this particular place several times in the past and I had never had any issues, so I wasn't tripping, nor was there any reason for me to think that this night was gonna be any different. When I had gone to this spot before, I had always seen people there who looked like they were a part of that so-called lifestyle. But like I said, I wasn't tripping and I never crossed paths with anyone I ever recognized. Anyways, when I pulled up to this taqueria this past Sunday night, I parked out front, got out of my truck, and walked inside like I had done every other time in the past. The restaurant was practically empty with the exception of 2 paisas who looked like they had been working a landscaping job all day. All bullshit aside, this place has some of the best Mexican food I've ever had out of all the other places I've ever been to in the past. The only place that even comes close to it is a small restaurant in the San Francisco Mission District that's in the heart of my neighborhood. So as I was standing there looking up at the menu, getting ready to order my nachos, my attention was briefly averted to the front of the restaurant as the door swung open and 2 dudes walked in that were definitely active norteños. One was about 6'1", stocky, with a long braided goatee and covered with tattoos. One of the tattoos that instantly stood out to me was a tattoo that he had across the front of his entire neck. The second guy was about 5'10", stocky, and was a little on the heavy side. He looked like the type of dude that tried to stay in shape by maybe working out twice a week, but who also didn't have the discipline to stop eating his cake and ice cream. He was also covered in ink, and the tattoos he had that stood out the most to me was a teardrop below his left eye and writing over his eyebrow that looked like the name Nikki or Misty. I'm sure this is probably the same for most of us that have been involved in the lifestyle, but most gang members pay close attention to each other's tattoos, as these more often than not represent affiliation or other things that you can tell a lot about someone. Like I said, the tattoos were something that stood out to me from the gate, but the other thing that stood out to me was the amount of red clothing these 2 cats were wearing. They were flamed up. And even though most dropouts have the tendency to wear red clothing, I can usually distinguish a DO from someone who's still active. I don't know how to explain it. There's just certain characteristics that are telltale that I can spot a mile away. So as I'm standing there waiting for my order to come out, I occasionally turned in these guys' direction and made eye contact with them. I wasn't trying to eye fuck these dudes or mad dog them. That wasn't my intention. But there just came a point when I started to wonder what these cats were up to and what they were doing. What didn't make sense to me was why they weren't ordering any food and why they were just standing in the back by the door. I had already placed my order and it wasn't like there was anyone else in line ahead of them. So now my spidey senses started tingling. What were these fools doing? Why were they there and what were they up to? All these questions started going through my head, and now I was beginning to wonder if I was going to find myself in some type of situation at one of the times when I was least expecting it. For the most part, I try not to allow myself to get too frazzled too easily. I don't get all tripped out when I see active homeboys, nor do I go into panic mode if I bump into someone I know is still active. I just continue doing whatever it is I'm doing and kind of wait to see what they're going to do, how they're going to react. When I first came back home after coming out of the Santa Clara County Jail, I had a big chip on my shoulder. If I caught someone looking at me, or if I felt like someone was trying to poke their chest out and be tough, I'd literally stop whatever I was doing and push up on that individual. It didn't matter who I was with or where I was at. I was being motivated by a hurt ego and the fact that I was no longer being embraced by people who I considered to be my brothers, people who I was once willing to die for. These are all things I had plenty of time to think about when I was still in the Santa Clara County Jail. Before I went through my transition and made the choices that I knew would have a life-altering effect on me from that point on, I decided there were a few things that I needed to commit to and vow to myself. I felt like if I couldn't maintain this commitment to myself and really mean it, then I wasn't going to go forward with it, and I just deal with the undesirable predicament that I was in. For one, I vowed to myself that I wasn't going to live my life in a state of perpetual paranoia, constantly looking over my shoulder and feeling like I always had to watch my back. I didn't want to live my life like that, and this is something I felt emphatic about. The other thing I felt as equally decisive about was the fact that I wasn't going to live my life like a recluse or an introvert, hiding and in constant fear of being identified. I wanted to live life with some measure of normalcy, not like a hermit. I wasn't going to allow myself to move to bumfucked Egypt, ducking and dodging the NF or people who I thought might have been trying to locate me. Those were the two things I had to come to terms with before I made some of the choices that I did. And this has nothing to do with my ego or undermining the circumstances I knew I was going to be in. I'm not saying I'm oblivious to my surroundings or that I don't pay attention to what goes on around me. That would be careless by any standards. It was just about normalcy and wanting to live my life a certain way. That's all it was. Prison has always taught me how to hone in on my surroundings and see things that the average person doesn't see. Threats, bad situations, etc., etc. I'll always have that ability. And because of that, I've developed a keen sense of awareness. In prison, this is one of the things that's kept me alive. In retrospect, I guess the same can be said about the streets. When I see certain things, especially when it comes to people, movement, and what's happening around me, I'm always watching and making mental evaluations. If something's happening around me and I see something that doesn't make sense, it usually sends up a red flag and makes me focus. Right before they called me to let me know that my food was ready, the shorter, heavier set guy went back outside and walked out of view. One thought that popped in my mind was, what if they called someone and were waiting for someone to come by with one of them things? Or if maybe they had already had one. As these thoughts are going through my mind, I start thinking about what I got in my truck. I didn't have one of those things with me, but I had 3 weapons that I could go for. The least likely that I thought about going for was a 6 to 7 inch buck knife that I had on my driver's side door in one of the little door compartments. If it would have been the only thing I would have had, I'm sure I could have made it work for me. But I also had a fat ass bumper jack I carried in the bed of my truck. And then I had a 15 to 17 inch machete that I kept in a sheath wedged between the passenger seat and the center console. Without question, the machete was what I was focusing on. When I grabbed my nachos and finished filling up a cup of horchata that they had by the register, I turned around and started walking towards the door. And as soon as I did that, the tall guy with the braided goatee, who was posted up in there, turned and stepped outside the door. That's when I knew it was official. These fools were up to no good and were obviously waiting for me to step out. As I got closer to the exit, my eyes were able to focus in on a black Buick that was parked next to my truck. And this was the first time I got a good look at a third dude that was with the other 2. The third guy was a small dude. He was probably about 5'8", and he couldn't have weighed no more than $160 soaking wet. He was sitting on the trunk smoking a cigarette, and the other heavier dude that had been inside the restaurant was posted up by the front of the car. He was standing on top of a parking stall block in the open parking space on the passenger side of the car. You know, that small rectangular piece of concrete that are in parking stalls to stop cars from pulling too far forward? That fool was standing on top of it, trying to keep his balance when I came walking up. As I started to cross the parking lot and I made a beeline towards my truck, I heard someone say, "Fucking degenerate." There's no mistake about it. I heard it loud and clear, and I knew exactly which one of them had said it. It was the tall one with the braided up goatee, the one who had the Welga bird on his throat. You know, I'm gonna say this. After coming outside and getting a better look at this dude, I wanna say I had seen him somewhere before. I know I've seen him. I had either done time with him or ran into him somewhere, but I still can't figure it out. So at this point, one thing's obvious. I hadn't had any words with these guys, and it wasn't like we bumped into each other in the restaurant. So this only meant one thing, that they definitely recognized me from somewhere. My guess is YouTube, but like I said, the tall dude looked familiar. I just couldn't place him. As soon as I heard this, I looked up and said, "What was that?" Needless to say, this fool didn't repeat himself. But like I said, he didn't need to because I heard him the first time. So as I instinctively started walking towards this tall cat to see whether or not he was going to let his nuts swing by repeating himself, his boy, the heavyset dude, jumped off the parking block and tried to snake me with the haymaker from the side. He missed, but he kicked it off. As soon as this dude swung, out of my peripheral, I seen the small dude that was sitting on the trunk roll off and the taller dude swarm me almost simultaneously at the same time. I was basically squared up with all three of them. But until I can get to my machete, I've got to get it in with these guys, playing it smart and using everything I can to my advantage. I've gotten off with 3 dudes in the past, so this wasn't my first rodeo. But this was also when I was a lot younger and I was in a lot better shape. The advantage that these cats had off the top was that they were all younger. In the past, whenever I fought 2, 3, or even 4 dudes, I've always looked at them and made a mental note of who I thought was the biggest threat. Because those are the ones I'll focus on, and those are the ones I'll try to knock down first. In this situation, it was the tall cat and the heavier set guy. The third guy just didn't come across as posing a threat. Later, this would end up being a mistake, but there's no way I could have possibly known that at the time. If I had to do it all over again, I would have handled it the same way. Anyways, at one point, I rushed in and tried to give the tall cat a quick 5-piece. But to keep it 100 with you guys, I caught more air than anything and only landed 2. But for anyone who's been on the receiving end of these hands, you know I hit hard. And if you can't take a punch, you know all it takes is one of these. So, when you're out there squabbing, you're throwing punches, you're moving around, and you're lightweight wrestling with a couple fools, it might seem like it's been going on forever. But in all actuality, most of the time, it all happens in less than 2 or 3 minutes. I'm gonna keep it real. I got tired, and there was a point when I was trading mitt for mitt with the main 2 when I said to myself, man, if I don't knock these fools out or do something quick, I'm gonna run out of petrol and be in trouble. So this is where things got interesting. There was 2 or 3 times when I kept going in on the tall dude, trying to catch him with the sleeper, when all of a sudden this fool threw a kick and knocked me dead on my ass. His kick caught me in the stomach and sent me straight back on my ass. It wasn't no flying helicopter kick or no Bruce Lee shit. I felt it, but it got me more upset than anything. I think it was just more because of the fact that this fool put me down and probably thought he really did something. But this is where things could have got a lot worse than they did. When Karate Boy caught me with that kick and sat me down, the other dude grabbed a handful of my shirt and did an old school move that I used to do myself. He grabbed my shirt and pulled it over my head. In other words, he went to pull my shirt off me, but instead wrapped it over my head to blind me. I'll give him his props. It's a good move, and this actually could have been a game changer. But I wasn't about to go for the blanket party or be a victim of one of my own signature moves. So I pulled my shirt off and came completely out of it. This is probably the only time the little guy got involved. As I was getting up, this fool threw a couple wild punches that I easily blocked by just putting my arm up. Before that, all the little dude did the whole time is act like he was gonna rush me or act like he was doing something. Seriously, when I was going blow for blow with both of his boys, all this fool kept doing was acting like he was gonna rush me and then back up. All I kept doing with this clown was to turn in his direction, stomp my foot, and then turn back away. By now I'm dead ass tired, and I have to go for my equalizer, and this was my chance. I make my blitz to my truck, opened the passenger door, and grabbed the machete I kept lodged in between the seat and the console. As soon as I whip out my machete and go after the small dude, only because he was the closest, this is the first time I noticed that my arm was leaking. I was leaking good too. I'm thinking to myself, one of these fools must have plugged me. I didn't even feel it. When you're fighting and your adrenaline's pumping, you don't feel shit. You just keep slinging them. So now I start trying to identify how I got plugged and which one of them did it. Not only because I'm pissed off, but also because I don't want to get plugged again. So I go after the small cat since he was the closest. But now I instinctively start looking at their hands. And this is when I see that this fool's got a small banger. Seriously, it was a little small one that he probably kept on his keychain. But in retrospect, he must have got me when I was getting up. Anyway, now I'm chasing all these fools around their car, around my truck, and around the parking lot, just trying to get close enough to pull an MS-13 on one of these cats. So as I'm going after one, then going after the other, people driving by start slowing down and they start honking their horns. I guess in an effort to stop us. For the most part, these fools are lucky I can't move as fast as I used to. But one of you know who you are, got clipped too. I still wanted to split one of these fools' wigs, but this was my cue to get the fuck up out of there. I'm sure Sandman will bear witness to this, but my truck is brand new. It's spotless. There isn't a blemish inside that thing. So I didn't even want to get in it because I didn't want to get any blood in it. Before I got in, I picked up my shirt off the ground where that fool had thrown it, and I used it to wrap my arm so I wouldn't keep bleeding. At one point, I tried to pop the tires on these fools' car with the machete so they couldn't go nowhere. But trust me, if you've ever tried to pop a tire with the machete, you know it ain't no easy task. I couldn't do it. I wasn't trying to go to jail, nor did I want to get caught in the act of chasing these fools with my machete. This is what I meant about getting into an unexpected situation that can also get you in trouble. Out of nowhere, if the cops would have rolled up and caught me in the act while I was chasing these cats with the machete, I would have been in trouble. One look at me and any self-defense claims would have been chopped liver. This entire incident actually happened by an intersection that has a lot of traffic. So aside from these good Samaritans that were honking their horns, there was also a white lady that was probably in her mid-30s who had her cell phone out recording it. I'm not sure how much of it she got, but lady, if you're out there and you see this, I'll pay you well for a copy of that video. So in closing, I'm just gonna say this. This incident could have been a lot more serious, and at least from my perspective, it wasn't a major thing. I'm saying that because I know how things could have been a lot different, and compared to other skirmishes I've been in, it just wasn't that bad. And I'm not glorifying this by any measure, but considering that this was a 3-on-1 and that these fools got the drop on me, I walked away with a W. For me, that was a win. I was supposed to have been got, lumped up, mangled, stomped, packed out, carteled in the middle of the street, and all that. I know the little guy probably feels victorious for plugging me in my arm, but even that was weak. It didn't even require a trip to the hospital. By the way, you might want to upgrade that keychain trinket to something a little bit bigger. On a closing note, one of the biggest lessons in all this that I want you guys to come away with is this here. Any one of us at any given time can be drawn into a situation like this, and that it can happen at a time when you're least expecting it. It doesn't matter what background you come from, what profession you're a part of, or how much you're trying to avoid it. These situations don't discriminate, and none of us are exempt from it. You could have been out with your family enjoying yourselves, and then a couple dudes press up on you, disrespecting you and your family. Then you rightfully go into protection mode and do what you got to do to protect your family. But then when it's all said and done, now you're being painted out to be the bad guy because you took it too far. The incident I was involved in could have easily resulted in me finding myself back in trouble, and it doesn't even matter that I wasn't the instigator or the aggressor. The fact that I didn't stop at a certain point, or the fact that I picked up a weapon and used it, might have been the game changer. It might have been the determining factor to a prosecutor who has a different way of looking at things. The other lesson that some of you need to take heed to is that you should never allow yourselves to become too lackadaisical or too complacent out there. Sometimes situations can develop at times when you least expect it, and that's something you should always remember. every time you leave the house. And the final lesson of the day, watch out for the flying helicopter kick. You don't want to make some fool feel like he got Bruce Lee kicks because you came in too fast and took one to the panza. I don't know what made me more mad. The fact that I got sat on my ass, or the fact that this fool probably felt like he scored a righteous knockdown. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. We have more stories dropping this week, and the shoe raffle will also be held either this Saturday or Sunday. Also, I know I keep mentioning the Q&A, but we're definitely going to be dropping that soon. It might even be next. And finally, we just want to give you guys a heads up that this channel is going to be implementing a new segment called Calls Behind the Walls this upcoming week. For those of you who like hearing the testimonials and the stories of guys who are locked up in prison, we're going to be incorporating this new segment as a regular fixture on our show. This is something that PMN has been working hard behind the scenes to establish these last few months, so be looking for this. As always, PMN just wants to thank you guys for continuing to support us, for continuing to stick with us, and for helping us grow. Like we always say, without you, the viewers, we would cease to exist.